Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Millicent Walker. Here are some of the stories making the rounds. Stakeholders of the Lake Chad region, Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon and Niger, meet to blur the boundaries and find lasting solutions to the proliferation of small and light weapons in the region. Plus, UK Minister for Armed Forces, Mr. James Happy, visits Nigeria, pledges Britain's continuous support to combat insurgency, terrorism and piracy in the Lake Chad Basin and the Gulf of Guinea. These are the highlights of the program this week. Let's check in on other discussions in the diplomatic circles. We'll be right back.
Pentagon leak suspect Jack Teixeira has been charged with unauthorized retention and transmission of classified documents and has appeared in court. The full complaint document filed by the U.S. government confirms that Jack Teixeira has held top security clearance since 2021 as part of his role in the Air National Guard. Teixeira could be looking at 15 years in prison if found guilty of both counts. The 21-year-old suspect, who is a member of the intelligence wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, was taken into custody from his North Dighton home in Massachusetts. The leak, described by the Pentagon as a deliberate criminal act, is set to contain a range of intelligence assessments about the war in Ukraine and other sensitive intelligence about countries around the world, including U.S. allies. US President Joe Biden met with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in Belfast, Northern Ireland, as part of his visit to mark the 25th anniversary of Northern Ireland's 1998 peace deal.
Well, Mom, you said it would happen. Coming home. I only wish I could stay longer.
Mr. Biden, who is always proud about his Irish heritage, spent just over half a day in the UK region before travelling south to the Irish Republic for 2.5 days of speeches and meetings with officials and distant relatives. Bahrain and Qatar have announced their decision to officially restore diplomatic relations as a fallout of the Bahraini-Qatari Follow-up Committee's second meeting at the headquarters of the Gulf Cooperation Council General Secretariat in Riyadh, the Saudi capital. Delegations of the two countries, led by the Bahrain Under-Secretary for Political Affairs and the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs Secretary General, reviewed the outcome of the first meeting and decided to resume diplomatic relations between the two countries in accordance with the principles of the United Nations Charter and the provisions of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, 1961. The decision stems from the mutual desire to develop bilateral relations and enhance the Gulf Cooperation Council's integration and unity, the respect for the principles of equality between states, national sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and good neighborliness. It was the latest development since the two declared their decision to sever diplomatic ties 6 years ago. Chad's ambassador to Germany has been expelled in a retaliatory move by Berlin after the Central African nation kicked out the European nation's ambassador. Germany's foreign minister says Chad's Mariam Ali Musa had to leave the country within 48 hours, says the regret that it had come to this. Germany's foreign minister made this known on Twitter, and the German ambassador to Chad, Jan-Christian Godorn-Craig, left the country after the military government expelled him. Chad had ordered Mr. Gordon out of the country for what it said was an impolite attitude and lack of respect for diplomatic customs. A brief statement from the Chadian government gave no further details about the reason for his removal. He had been critical of the military-led government that has been in power since April 2021. Banks in Cuba will again accept cash deposits in US dollars after a ban prohibiting the practice. Cubans have been unable to deposit dollars in cash into their accounts at various banks and other financial institutions in the country in almost 2 years, the worst economic crisis to hit Cuba in decades. The Cuban government brought in the ban in 2021, citing continuing difficulties caused by ongoing U.S. embargo. The resolution by the Central Bank of Cuba, the BCC, was published in Cuba's official gazette and took effect immediately. The resolution also stated that the economic pressure from the United States, which it said led to the ban in the first place, remained in place, and therefore the root of the problem had not been solved. Cuba has been under U.S. sanctions for more than 6 decades, but the economic restrictions placed on it were further tightened under the Trump administration as it became increasingly difficult for Cuba's central bank to find international banks willing to receive dollars in cash from the communist-run island.
The proliferation of small arms and light weapons has contributed to the escalation of conflict and violence, which has impeded economic and social development in the Lake Chad region. That's according to the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, who was speaking at a meeting with stakeholders in the Lake Chad Basin, made up of Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, Niger and Benin in the nation's Federal Capital Territory.
It's the first multilateral meeting of stakeholders from the Lake Chad Basin region to be hosted by Nigeria, and representatives from Chad, Benin, Cameroon and Niger Republic are in attendance. Nigeria has witnessed different dimensions of conflicts ranging from terrorism to banditry, and this is believed to have been exacerbated by the illicit circulation of small and light weapons in the hands of non-state actors. This meeting is intended to profile solutions to the problem.
This meeting presents an exceptional prospect for us to rub minds, share experiences, adopt best international practices and laudable ideas on how to efficiently and effectively tackle the attendant threat caused by the proliferation of small arms and light weapons.
Tackling the challenge requires a multi-pronged approach and cross-border collaborations.
The proliferation of small arms in the Lake Chad Basin is a major security concern that has far-reaching consequences for the region. It has contributed to the escalation of conflict and violence and has impeded the economic and social development of the countries in the region.
We can individually thrift efforts to a common or collective initiative in order to streamline activities and responses aimed at the joint fight against sources, trafficking, and supply of these illicit small arms and light weapons.
The meeting is expected to produce a white paper with recommendations for participating countries.
As part of efforts to combat insurgency, terrorism and piracy in the Lake Chad Basin and the Gulf of Guinea, the United Kingdom Minister for Armed Forces, Mr. James Happy, has pledged the continuous support of Britain to enable Nigeria combat all non-state actors. The minister, who was on a working visit to Nigeria, said Britain is committed to improving intelligence sharing with Nigeria and other countries in the Sahel region and would continue to strengthen efforts against insecurity in the region while helping Africa provide its own solution to the security challenges. Mr. Happy made this known at the British High Commission in Abuja.
That friendship has been renewed again and again and again since the point of independence, because we have worked together to address challenges like maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea or terrorism in the Lake Chad Basin. And we will continue to do so. Now, a lot of that is connected to training together and sharing tactics and techniques for how to deal with the problems of the day. But also it's to do with a shared inventory. It's to do with operating the same kit. Like, for example, the Husky armoured vehicle, which was a vehicle that was used very successfully by the British Armed Forces in Afghanistan, is designed to be used in counterinsurgency type operations such as is needed to address some of the security challenges in this part of the world. And so that combination of training together, developing capability together, added to our shared history, is what makes the relationship between the UK and Nigerian armed forces so strong. And I have every confidence it will continue to be strong for many decades to come.
Jordan has approved a new visa regime for Nigerians. This comes as Nigeria and Jordan discuss ways of enhancing cooperation and cultural exchange between both countries. The Jordanian Minister of Tourism and Antiquities, Mr. Makram Al-Qaisi, announced this and other cooperation in a number of other sectors, including agricultural and cultural exchanges, for Nigeria at a meeting with the management of the Nigeria Christian Pilgrim Commission in Amman, the country's capital. Mr. Kwesi says he hopes to use Nigeria to make inroads into Africa. Jordan has mapped out plans for closer bilateral ties with Nigeria beyond pilgrimages.
Jordan is opening its doors for tourism potential. Christian pilgrims from different parts of the world visit the country. Tourism is a major source of revenue for the country, generating as much as $5.81 billion in 2022, when around 5 million tourists visited the country. The similarity of the topography and the climate of plateau states raises interest in the potential of tourism in the plateau.
And I think we can do a lot in improving how or the potentials of tourism on the plateau. If we're able to work on those potentials, it's going to actually help in projecting the state.
As a spiritual trip, we can look around and see the difference between Jordan and Nigeria. And it can help us to reflect deeply on how best we can go about it our own way back home.
Starting from Jos, coming to this another new place. Just recently, they decided to create more settlements. This is what we call it, the Games Reserve. And if they're able to do that, we see that more tourists will come into Nigeria.
The Christians in Jordan.
The country wants to do more with Africa and considers Nigeria as the gateway. This meeting with the Nigerian delegation is one of the efforts towards improving the relationship between both countries.
Already grant visas for the Nigerian pilgrims. I think it takes maximum 1 week to get the visa. And we grant also multiple visas for 6 months. And we're working to extend this duration for the visa, maybe for a year or more.
We have talked about the visas, and indeed is graciously granted us multiple visas, especially those who will be coming often here for the pilgrimage activities and other activities for coordination. And we're also very grateful for him to give us his time to also speak on other things like building cultures together and also talk about medical tourism. We have also talked about agriculture with our youths.
The Jordanian minister hopes to visit Nigeria before the end of the year to consolidate the relationship between both countries.
Though the on-hand business of proliferation of small arms and light weapons, popularly known as gun running, has been in existence for decades, it has become more alarming in light of security concerns in West Africa. At the moment, the volume of illicit weapons has reached a frightening dimension, fueled by weak security architecture and connivance, corruption as well, and many more. We speak to Mr. Vince Onyekwelu, who's the former British police officer and security risk strategist on the issue. Mr. Vince Onyekwelu, former British police officer, security risk strategist on security in the Lake Chad region. Thank you. He joins me now for more. Welcome to Diplomatic Channel.
Thank you for having me.
What's your take on the security situation in the Lake Chad region?
The security challenges in the Lake Chad region is obviously because of one or too many things. In Africa, on the Lake Chad region in the past, they were used to having issues around conflict, like armed violence, like civil wars. But in the last decade, the issues of civil wars are no longer as common as it used to be in that Lake Chad region or even across the Sahel. But since that civil war have stopped in those areas, the economic growth in those areas has actually improved. However, one of the challenges that those areas are having right now is issues around extremism. It's become a very common kind of security threat in those regions. After extremism, we still have issues of piracy. And also after piracy, we still have issues around people dealing in illegal arms. All right. Then human trafficking is also another issue. So the Lake Chad region is part of the long expanse of land called the Sahel region in Africa. So basically, some schools of thought classify the Sahel region as where you have a mishmash of ecoclimatic and biogeographical regions of Africa. So in that ecoclimatic and biogeographical, you have in the north the desert, whereas you have in the southern part of the Sahel, the savanna. And in some parts of the Sahel, you even have rainforest. So it's an area that has diversified ecoclimatic issues. And then on the left, you have the Atlantic Ocean. On the right, you have the Arabian Peninsula, where you have the Red Sea. So in that very ecoclimatic and biogeographic region, that's where you have countries like Chad, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and others like Southern Sudan, Mauritania, Mali. And you have dynamic collection of different religions, believers. You also have militant or militia leaders in those areas. You have experienced traffickers, because it's not an easy area that it's so expansive. There are so many ways you can get from one country, from Senegal, you can get into Mali. So it's so difficult. So that is why Chad region is having those challenges. And even Nigeria is not innocent from all those challenges also from the Sahel.
So Vince, is tackling insecurity by blocking the proliferation of small arms, light weapons, the first step, especially when you look at the hybrid of issues, terrorism, banditry, and others?
Blocking light arms and small weapons, yes, it's a good strategy. However, in my own school of thought, in my expertise, we also look at the root causes: unemployment, poverty, lack of people that have been kind of educated. A lot of people in those areas, yes, even if you block the light weapons and small arms, it's a big plus. But you also have to ask yourself question: if we can educate the regions, the countries that live across the Sahel on how to develop the capacity to secure their borders, how to develop the capacity to use technology to identify hidden weapons. Because light weapons and small arms, even though it sounds light weapons, it sounds small arms, they are dangerous weapons We're talking about automatic rifles, semi-automatic rifles. Even you have some missile systems, mortar launching systems, and these, even some level of light armored vehicles are also categorized as light weapons and small arms. So let's not get deceived by the name light and small. These are very dangerous arms. The AK-47, the AK-48 are all part of the light weapon systems. Some categories of armored vehicles are light weapons also. Mortar launchers, hand grenades, automatic rifles, semi-automatic rifles, they're all part of light weapons. So we need to empower the countries in that Sahel region, proper education, the use of technology to identify these weapons. Because just like in Nigeria, you will see checkpoint, but when you get there, they are doing physical searching. And what can they actually find with physical searching? But if they have technologies that have calibrations to understand if there are things like metal that is not supposed to be part of the vehicle, they can identify those parts of vehicles so you can actually search. We've seen people that know how to hide AK-47 or other kinds of rifles under motorbikes. And if you don't have those technologies, you're going to struggle to identify. So education, technology, and giving nations in the Sahel the capacity to know how to protect their borders will go a long way.
What solutions do you think are there for neighboring countries to come together to tackle the attendant threats of small arms and light weapons? I know you've mentioned technology, but another issue might also be revenue, and maybe that collaboration with these countries that are in that axis. And do you think that the porous borders, which has been an issue, that it continues to exist, and do you see that being a problem?
Our porous borders are a big problem. And why are borders porous? Because most nations still adopt the idea of manual policing of their national borders. Borders are porous because the primary organizations that are supposed to secure national borders prefer to do other programs outside protect of national borders. So one of the solutions, apart from technology, will be also the issue of understanding that the Sahel region, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, has been a route that travelers have been using for decades to travel to somewhere like Saudi Arabia, go to Mauritania. So it's a long stretch of land that the route or the route has been there for decades. So the bottom line is for people to actually come together for nations in the Sahel, from South Sudan to Sudan, from Chad to Cameroon, from Niger to Nigeria, from Mali to Mauritania to Senegal, for them to see if they can actually force a collaboration, build a collaboration, so they can put heads together to understand the challenges, the innocent users of those routes from the Atlantic to the Red Sea. Find out what is the challenges they're facing, how they can secure those areas to make sure that criminals, especially extreme people that believe in ideas of religious bigotry or religious ideologies that are now the new kind of threat that you have in those regions. Who are they? Where are they coming from? So I think it's collaboration across between 18 nations in that Sahel region for them to come together to force a collaboration force to research the area, to understand the challenges, and to find the best solutions to monitor with the use of technology what goes in and what goes out without stopping innocent travelers from doing their innocent sojourn.
All right. Bento Ekwalo, we would like to appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us on Diplomatic Channel.
Thanks for having me.
And that's Diplomatic Channels this week. Thanks again for watching. You can watch this and other episodes again on our YouTube channel /Channels Web and Channels Playlist. I'm Millicent Walker. I'll see you next time.